from Singapore. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, loud and clear.
Okay, I could barely hear the conversation here, so I hope I come through. It's early morning here, and my jet lag will show. The broad context, where we've been, where we are, and what's happening now, as I see it. Following the wars of the mid-20th century, there have been no major wars in East Asia for several decades now. Yes, persistent historical, ethnic, religious, and territorial cleavages lingered, but disputes were restrained for most of these periods, and major powers normalized diplomatic relations, something that we now take for granted. At the time, military expenditures over this period did not undermine macroeconomic and regional stability, and indeed such expenditures declined as a percentage of GDP. In addition, intra and extra-regional trade and investment expanded dramatically. So what were the foundations of this peaceful development? And now I hope to address a little bit of the elephant in the room that Mr. Kaplan, I think, mentioned. The underlying foundations of China's political economy. Well, the underlying foundations, of course, include the U.S. role as a vital component, but I'd like to focus on another crucial source of restraint that operated over that period. And that is the standard internationalizing model that most states in this region adopted in terms of advancing economic growth through engagement in the global economy. The dominant incentives of leaders advancing those, I'll call, internationalizing strategies were granting primacy to macroeconomic stability, to all those things that are beneficial to foreign investment. Another incentive was to promote regional economic and security institutions to buttress the expansion of intra and extra-regional trade and investments. But these institutions were of the open regionalism kind. I'll come back to this point in a second. A third goal of these leaders was to maintain a stable regional environment that would not compel expansive military budgets, because such expenditures deficits affect foreign investments. All those incentives compelled the taming of territorial, maritime, and history disagreements. Relations between China and Japan, Vietnam, South Korea, ASEAN, etc., were not necessarily built on harmony, but on the recognition that all must adjust policies and restrain unilateralism. Of course, lingering issues of memory and history remain, but they did not preclude economic, political, and diplomatic reconciliations. China's charm offensive, in particular, required a peaceful rise, a new matrix of regional relations, more mature relations with neighbors, a new openness to regional and multilateral institutions, etc. Now, this evolution took in the last few years. We're all painfully familiar with what happened. A more intrusive presence from nationalistic, inward-looking forces in several countries that eroded cooperation and undermined the dominant internationalizing model. The result we're all familiar with: a more aggressive vigilance over territorial disputes, overlapping air defense identification zones that replaced restraint and mature diplomacy, claims over islands and rocks, hardened alliances, more aggressive forms of nationalism, more negative views of neighbors, more exclusionary regional institutions, more unilateralist behavior rather than agreed codes of conduct, and more military modernization with offensive overtones. Now, these changes reflect both domestic pressures from inward-looking constituencies and contagious diffusion, so that one country's nationalism strengthened nationalism in neighboring countries in spiral fashion. And these dynamics made it harder to restore the previous internationalizing equilibrium. Obviously, visits to Yasukuni Shrine were one instance of spiraling action-reaction conflict behavior. And a proneness to brinkmanship of the kind we've seen in the last couple of years lowered the, leading to some comparisons with World War I, even if, in my view, some of these comparisons can be overdone. So where are we now? Though they remain threatened by inward-looking nationalism, internationalizing models have not become extinct in this part of the world. There are some signs that leaders have recalculated the costs of confrontation, leaders on all sides. As an example, some of the costs of confrontation, Japan's FDI, foreign direct investment, decreased dramatically, maybe half in 2014, and all sides suffered from diminished economic exchange and exacerbated. The recent understanding between China and Japan and the handshake between the two leaders have been preceded by a number of efforts to de-escalate their dispute since last summer. But the road ahead, I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of echo here. The road ahead, I think, requires that leaders coordinate a lot better against those internal and external enemies. And such enemies include not just hyper-nationalism or North Korea, another anachronism in the region, but also the possibility of downturn economic spirals that can make regional relations or regional tensions even more acute. The beneficiaries of it would be those inward-looking constituencies in each country that, in my view, would increase the likelihood of armed conflict. So East Asian leaders must focus the mind on the fact that their populations strongly favor economic exchange. A Pew Research Center poll shows 86% of the public across 11 Asian states think trade is a good thing for their country, and it shows that 89% of Chinese people describe their economic situation as good, as benefiting from economic expansion. Well, surely those benefits are creating an Asia-Pacific dream for the people of the region, in the words of President Xi Jinping yesterday. Well, those benefits are incompatible with aggressive nationalism. But just to end, a common purpose to prevent shared threats requires, I think, sustained openness, inclusive rather than exclusionary institutions, shared codes of conduct, arrangements, and much more. The U.S. can play a constructive role in these efforts, but all East Asian leaders must treat nationalism as an infectious disease that may not be completely eradicated, inert. Nationalism does never bolster legitimacy. It entraps leaders. It can lead to their demise, as both Japan and Germany learned in the 20th century. Leaders of the 20th century have the 21st century have the duty to look back to and to avoid the catastrophes visited on the world on the 20th century. Thank you.